I had to move to a new city, far from home, far from everything I used to know. I won't get into the details, but let's just say family problems and a 2-year-long toxic relationship finally pushed me to the edge. I needed a fresh new start, something cleaner, quieter. So I packed my life into a few bags and left it all behind. My past, my pain, that house full of shouting and silence. I ended up in a different state, in a city I'd never even visited before. It felt surreal. Honestly, I hadn't really left home much growing up, so this was a whole new world. It felt good, liberating even, like I could finally breathe again. Before the move, I found a place online, a small furnished one-bedroom apartment tucked inside a tall building that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. Nothing fancy, but it was within my budget and available immediately. When I first arrived, the place gave off this weird stillness. The hallway lights buzzed with a pale, flickering glow, and the air felt stale, like it hadn't been circulated in years. The landlord met me there, a short, scruffy man with a thick accent I couldn't quite place. He seemed nice though, overly talkative actually. Gave me a quick tour of the apartment, handed me the keys, and kept rambling on about the building's history and rules. But there was this one thing he said, just a quick comment that stuck in my head, even through all the noise. He mentioned how it's hard to get people to stay here. I asked what he meant by that, but he just brushed past it, kept talking like he hadn't even said it. I figured it was just some weird quirk, maybe a joke that didn't land. After he left, it was just me, my bags, and this old apartment. The furniture was worn out, stained in places, but I told myself it was still a fresh start. I unpacked, set my alarm and went to bed early. I had my first shift in the next morning at my new job. I just finished my nursing degree, so I was coming in on a rotating schedule. Day shifts, night shifts, no real rhythm. I'd be coming and going at all hours. The days started to blur together after I settled in at the new place. Between the rotating shifts at work and the unfamiliar city, I barely had time to think. But even in that fog of exhaustion, I started to notice something strange. I lived on the 3rd floor, and yet I never saw anyone else. Not once. Not in the hallway, not by the elevators, not even a neighbor stepping out to grab a delivery. At first, I figured maybe everyone's just keeping to themselves. Maybe they were all working at odd hours like me. Nurses, night shift workers, that kind of thing. I mean, I was coming and going at all hours. Sometimes 3 a.m., sometimes noon, and I always made an effort to stay quiet. But still a whole week passed, and I hadn't seen or heard a single person on my whole floor. One night, I came home late and found something stuck in my door, a bright red pamphlet wedged in the frame, half hanging out like it was meant to be impossible to miss. It was an advertisement for a local Chinese restaurant, probably just trying to pull in new customers. I glanced down the hallway. That's when I noticed something weird. Every single door on my floor had the same pamphlet, stuck the exact same way, all of them, untouched. I tossed mine into the trash and tried not to think much about it. Maybe everyone was just out. Maybe they all got their mail and just didn't care. But still, it felt off. Sleeping wasn't easy either. My apartment window faced another building directly across. And every night, like clockwork, around dinner time, the apartment window directly mirroring mine, with their blinds always closed but the window itself cracked open just a little. The person inside would play music. But the smell. Every single night, they cooked something that smelled amazing. Something I couldn't even name. Something rich and savory that drifted straight into my room through the crack in my own window. It was torture, honestly. After days of living off microwave dinners, that scent made it almost impossible to sleep. I tried everything, closing my window, spraying air freshener, even stuffing the gap with towels. But nothing worked. The smell always found a way in, and it lingered for hours. As more days went by, that uneasy feeling kept growing. I started noticing those Chinese restaurant pamphlets. They were still there, on every door, exactly where they'd been a week ago. Unmoved. Not a single one had fallen on the floor or been kicked aside. That's when it hit me. No one else was living on my floor. Later that week, there was a knock at my door. It was my landlord. He seemed unusually excited to see me. Same as before, talking a mile a minute, bouncing from one topic to another like he couldn't help himself. I got the sense he wasn't used to people listening, or maybe he just couldn't stand silence. He was there for the rent, so I handed it over, and for once, I tried to keep the conversation going. Maybe get a little more insight into this weird building I now call home. I asked him about the other tenants on my floor, how I hadn't seen or heard a single one since I moved in, and how those takeout pamphlets were still wedged into every door, like no one had touched them in weeks. The moment I brought it up though, something shifted in his face. His smile dropped, just a little, but enough for me to notice. He gave me a half-hearted chuckle and muttered something about how most people here were hermits, that they don't go out much. But he couldn't hold eye contact, and for a man who loves to ramble, he sure ended the conversation fast. He turned without another word and walked off, like nothing happened. A few nights later I got home right around dinner time, the time I'd start dreading every microwave meal I've ever had. But that night, there was nothing. No smell, not even any music. Just quiet. Curious, and honestly kind of relieved, I went to the window. For the first time, the blinds on the opposite window were open. Wide open. And so was the window itself. I could see straight in. It looked like a clean kitchen. Then someone stepped into view. A man. He opened the fridge door, and from where I stood, it looked completely empty. That struck me as odd, considering the feast-like aromas that usually drifted into my room every night. He then moved slowly, casually, like he was at home. And then I saw his face. It was my landlord. He lived directly across from me, this whole time. He looked up. Our eyes met. And then he smiled, this unsettling grin, and gave me a slow, soft wave, like he'd been expecting me to look. I froze for a moment, unsure what to do. I stepped away from the window and turned toward my apartment. That's when I noticed it. Something was off. The moment I turned away from that window, I felt it, like the air in the room had shifted. The kind of shift you can't explain, but your body knows before your mind does. I looked around. Little things, just barely noticeable, were out of place. A chair slightly angled the wrong way. Multiple drawers that weren't fully closed. Nothing dramatic, but enough to make me think twice. That crawling feeling settled in my spine. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe I'd moved those things without thinking. Maybe I was just tired. I still searched every inch of that place. Under the bed, inside the closets, behind the shower curtain. Nothing. No sign of a break-in. No reason to feel how I felt. But I couldn't shake it. So before I went to bed, I dragged my heavy dining table across the room and wedged it tightly against the door, just in case. I didn't care how irrational it looked. I needed to know that no one could come in while I was sleeping, but I was too tired to think straight. I shut the blinds, collapsed onto my bed, and fell asleep. I really wish I hadn't. Later that night, I was jolted awake by knocking, followed by pounding, then pushing. I shot out of bed and ran into the living room. The only light came from the hallway outside, bleeding through the edges of the door. Except now, the door was cracked open, just barely, and someone was on the other side, forcing it, pushing, inch by inch. I watched as the heavy dining table I'd shoved in front of the door started to scrape along the floor, moving. Someone was trying to get in. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and rushed to the door, throwing my weight into the table to push it back, trying to seal it shut. The moment I did, the hallway light disappeared. The room went dark again. But the banging didn't stop. Then I heard the voice, yelling, demanding, pleading. It was my landlord. He was screaming at me to let him in, shouting through the door that he was hungry, over and over, louder each time. My hands trembled as I dialed the police. I could barely speak through the panic, tears streaming down my face as I begged the operator to send someone, anyone, as quickly as possible. On the other side of the door, the table kept shifting. He was still pushing, still trying to get through. I could feel the pressure, hear the scrape of the wood against tile. Then suddenly, silence. I think he heard me talking to the police, because just like that the banging stopped, and I heard footsteps, quick, heavy, retreating down the hallway. I shoved the table back against the door and locked it again. I knew it wouldn't matter. He had a key, but it was all I could do to even feel slightly safe. 5 minutes passed. It felt like an eternity. Then finally, there was another knock at the door, but this time it was the police. 4 officers. I hesitated, terrified to open it, but I forced myself to. I told them everything, my voice stuttering, my thoughts jumbled, barely able to speak, that I locked the door before bed, that the only other person with a key would have been my landlord, that it had to be him. One officer stayed with me, while the others went to his apartment, the one directly across from mine. But he wasn't there. They said they would try and track him down, but in the meantime, they asked if I had somewhere safe to stay. I didn't. Not really. Eventually I called a co-worker from the hospital. I was too embarrassed to explain it myself, so one of the officers did for me. They came to pick me up. They were kind. They didn't question anything. They let me sleep in their bed while they took the couch. It didn't help though. I didn't sleep that night. I still don't sleep well. The next morning one of the officers met me back at the apartment. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it again. That wrongness, that subtle, quiet shift in the air. I packed everything I owned without saying a word. I didn't go back to work. I couldn't. That man could be anywhere. Eventually I decided to move back home. Back to the family I'd worked so hard to get away from. Dysfunctional, sure. But at least I knew what to expect. Even my ex reached out when he heard I was back. Showed up with flowers. Said he'd change, promised things would be different this time. I want to believe him. Maybe this is just who I'm meant to be. Maybe this is where I belong. As time went by, I tried forgetting everything. But then, I got a follow-up call from a police detective. He started by explaining something I'll never forget. Apparently almost everyone in the city knew about that building, and the reason why it was so empty. It was because it had a bad history. Over the years, multiple tenants who lived there had gone missing. Quietly, without much attention, one by one they vanished. The detective guessed that since I wasn't from the city, I couldn't have known. Especially since I needed a place fast, and especially because the landlord had deliberately not told me. But what the detective told me next will stay with me for the rest of my life. They searched the apartment directly across from mine, the one I used to stare into, that one where that delicious smell of home-cooked food used to drift from night after night. Inside his refrigerator, they found remnants of the missing tenants. They believe he had been eating them. To this day, they still haven't found him. But that's not what haunts me. What keeps me up at night isn't the fact that he's still out there. Not the fact that he had a key to my apartment the whole time. Not even the thought of how close I came to becoming his next meal. It was the smell. That warm, savory, mouth-watering smell that filled my apartment every night. I hate admitting it, but it smells so good. And that's what haunts me the most.